The air was thick with the scent of dust and gunpowder, the heat pressing down like an invisible weight. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the base, a land of unforgiving silence, where danger had lurked in the shadows for far too long. But now the mission was over. The war, at least for him, had ended. Sergeant Nathan Carter stood beside the armored transport, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, but the weight that pressed against his chest had nothing to do with gear. It was the weight of goodbye. At his side, Thor sat perfectly still, his massive frame radiating discipline, his amber eyes locked on Nathan with quiet intensity. The German shepherd had been his partner through it all, through the firefights, the long nights on patrol, the moments where death had been inches away, and now the army was tearing them apart. "You can't take him with you, Sergeant," the officer said, his tone clipped and emotionless. "Thor is still military property. He's being reassigned." Nathan's jaw tightened. He had known this was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. "He's not property," he said, his voice low but firm. "He's my partner." The officer didn't flinch. He had heard it before. Handlers rotated out. Dogs stayed. That was the rule. Nathan looked down at Thor, who was still waiting, still watching, as if waiting for a command that would never come. His hand reached out instinctively, brushing over the thick fur at the dog's neck, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "It's okay, boy," he murmured. "You did good. You always did good." Thor let out a quiet breath, his ears twitching at Nathan's voice, but he didn't move. He didn't understand what was happening, only that something was wrong. "Time to go, Sergeant." The words felt final. Nathan swallowed hard, forcing himself to straighten, to let his hand drop. If he let himself break, even for a second, he might not be able to walk away. He turned toward the transport, his steps heavy, each one feeling like a betrayal. Behind him, Thor rose to his feet. The soft click of his nails against the pavement sent a sharp pain through Nathan's chest. The dog took a single step forward, his body tense, his instincts screaming to follow, to stay by his handler's side like he had always done. "Hold him back," the officer ordered. A handler stepped in, gripping Thor's harness, pulling him away. The dog resisted, his ears pinning back, his deep, rumbling whine cutting through the air. Nathan clenched his fists. He couldn't turn around. If he did, he wouldn't be able to leave. Thor barked, short, sharp, a call. Nathan swallowed, his throat burning. "Stay, boy," he forced out. "Stay." Thor froze, his muscles locked in place, his eyes never leaving Nathan. His body trembled, every ounce of training battling against instinct. And then the door to the transport closed. The last thing Nathan saw before the vehicle pulled away was Thor standing there, unmoving, ears pricked forward, waiting. Nathan turned his head away, blinking hard, willing himself to breathe. But as the base disappeared behind him, he knew some wounds didn't heal, some ghosts didn't fade, and the memory of Thor, standing alone on that tarmac, would haunt him forever. The years had taken their toll. The once powerful stride had slowed. The muscles that once surged with energy now moved with careful precision. Thor was no longer the fierce young war dog who had charged into battle beside his handler. His fur, once sleek and dark, was now peppered with gray. The scars that lined his body, earned from years of service, told stories no one would ever hear. His last mission had ended without fanfare. No medals, no ceremony, no one waiting for him when they removed his vest for the last time. The military deemed him retired, a term that should have meant comfort, a quiet home, the care he had earned after years of unwavering loyalty. Instead, they brought him here. The shelter was small, a place meant for lost pets, not warriors. The barking of restless dogs echoed off the metal walls, but Thor remained silent, lying near the door, his amber eyes fixed on the entrance. He didn't understand why he was here. He didn't understand why the ones he had protected, the ones he had saved, had left him behind. Each morning, a staff member would open his kennel, calling his name, but he wouldn't move. They would place food in his bowl, fresh water beside it, but he barely touched either. When they tried to coax him outside, he would sit at the threshold, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, searching, waiting. Days turned into weeks. The faces changed. Different workers moving through the shelter, but none of them were the one he was waiting for. His ears would perk at the sound of footsteps outside, his body tense with expectation. But it was never Nathan. People came and went, stopping at the kennels, looking for a dog to bring home. Some paused by his cage, their eyes widening at the sheer size of him, at the intelligence behind his steady gaze. But then they would glance at his file, at the words former military working dog, and shake their heads. Too much work. Too serious. He's too old. Thor watched them leave without emotion. He had never begged for attention, had never sought anything but a command from the one person who mattered, and so he waited. Even when the lights dimmed at night, when the shelter grew quiet and the other dogs curled up in their beds, Thor remained by the door, his body stiff, his breath slow, his ears flicking at every distant noise. Because deep down, no matter how much time passed, he still believed that his handler would come back for him. Because a soldier never leaves a partner behind. The shelter was never quiet. The constant hum of barking dogs, the clatter of metal food bowls, and the occasional chatter of visitors created a familiar rhythm. But Thor never reacted. He remained still in his kennel, his amber eyes sharp, watching every person who passed. His posture was always rigid, his body coiled with the quiet discipline of a soldier waiting for orders. People came every day, some looking for puppies, others for a friendly, tail-wagging companion eager to jump into their arms. But Thor was not like the others. He did not wag his tail. He did not jump to the front of the kennel, begging for attention. He simply watched. Potential adopters would pause, taking in his large, powerful frame, his thick fur peppered with gray, his intelligent gaze that missed nothing. And then, almost every time, they would read the sign attached to his kennel, name Thor, breed German Shepherd, age 9 years, status retired military working dog. That was where they hesitated. He's too serious, one woman murmured, gripping her child's hand tighter as they stepped away. A dog like that needs a job. He wouldn't fit in a home, another man muttered, shaking his head. He looks dangerous. Thor listened, his ears twitching slightly at their words, but he did not move. He had spent his life following orders, never questioning, never demanding. Now he didn't know what they wanted from him. The shelter staff tried. They spoke softly to him, brought him treats, walked him around the yard in the hopes that someone would see past the hardened exterior. But no one did. He wasn't a pet. He wasn't playful. He was a warrior without a mission, a soldier without a battlefield. And the shelter was running out of time. The head of the facility, a kind but weary woman named Linda, stood outside Thor's kennel one evening, her hands pressed against the metal bars. "You deserve better than this," she whispered, watching as the old war dog lay with his head on his paws. He didn't respond, but she knew he understood. She sighed, glancing toward the clipboard in her hand, where a list of unadopted dogs grew shorter every month. The shelter was overcrowded, resources stretched thin. She had seen it happen before. Older dogs, dogs deemed too much work, were given a deadline. And Thor's was coming soon. She knelt down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone's going to come for you, I know it." Thor blinked once, his eyes reflecting something distant, something unspoken. But deep inside, even he was starting to lose hope. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural to Nathan Carter. He had spent years surrounded by the hum of military radios, the low growls of his K-9 partner at his side, the distant echo of helicopters overhead. Now it was just the occasional creak of the floorboards and the soft buzz of the ceiling fan. He sipped his coffee, the bitter taste grounding him as he scrolled absent-mindedly through his phone. It was just another morning, another day of trying to adjust to civilian life, trying to pretend that something wasn't missing. Then a headline caught his eye. "Forgotten Heroes, the Fate of Retired Military Dogs." Nathan frowned, his finger hovering over the link. He hesitated, then tapped it. The article loaded slowly, an image appearing at the top, a German shepherd with graying fur, staring through the bars of a kennel. His stomach twisted. The words blurred as he skimmed through, his pulse quickening. It detailed how military working dogs, once trained for combat, were often left in shelters if no one claimed them after retirement. Some were adopted, but many too old, too trained, too much of a burden, were left waiting. A hollow feeling settled in his chest. He had always assumed Thor was placed somewhere safe after his service, maybe with another handler or a special program. The thought of him abandoned, sitting behind a cage, sent a sharp burning anger through him. It couldn't be. His fingers moved on their own, dialing an old contact from his unit. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Carter, damn, man, haven't heard from you in a while. Yeah, Nathan said, clearing his throat. Listen, I need to ask you something. Thor, my old K9, do you know where he ended up? There was a pause on the other end. The hesitation made Nathan's grip tighten around the phone. Carter, you don't want to know. Nathan's heart pounded. Tell me. A heavy sigh, then the truth. He's in a shelter. Has been for a while. Nathan's breath left him in a sharp exhale. His free hand clenched into a fist, his mind already racing. He barely heard the rest of what was said. Something about no one wanting to adopt a dog like Thor. Something about time running out. He didn't need to hear more. His keys were on the counter. His bag was already packed with enough to last him on the road. He had no plan, no clear direction, only a name, a shelter, and a certainty deep in his bones. Thor needed him, and nothing was going to stop him from getting his partner back. The road stretched endlessly before him, the white lines blurring into a monotonous rhythm as the tires hummed against the pavement. Nathan's knuckles were tight around the wheel, his jaw clenched, his thoughts a relentless loop of urgency. Thor was waiting. He had barely taken the time to process it. The moment he learned his partner had been abandoned, left in a shelter with no home, no recognition, no dignity, he had moved on instinct. Keys, bag, truck, gone. There had been no hesitation, no second thoughts. He wasn't letting Thor spend another day behind those bars. The sky was dark now, the stars smeared across the horizon, but Nathan didn't stop. The shelter was states away, but distance didn't matter. What mattered was time. Thor had been there too long, and time, Nathan knew, wasn't a luxury shelter dogs were given. He pushed the gas pedal harder. Memories came unbidden, flashing through his mind like old war footage on a grainy screen. Thor at his side, ears pricked, scanning the desert landscape as they moved through hostile territory. The way his body tensed right before an ambush, sensing danger before anyone else could. The countless times he had thrown himself between Nathan and the enemy, his instincts always razor sharp, his loyalty unquestionable. And then there were the quiet moments. The late nights when the camp was still and it was just the two of them, sitting in the dirt, the distant sounds of conflict fading into the background. Nathan had talked to him then, not expecting answers, just needing someone to hear. And Thor had listened, his head tilted slightly, his amber eyes steady, as if he understood everything Nathan could never say out loud. He had trusted Nathan with his life, and now Thor was alone, forgotten, waiting. Nathan gritted his teeth and pressed forward, the miles vanishing behind him. The thought of Thor sitting behind a cage, confused and wondering where his handler had gone, sent a fresh wave of determination through him. He wasn't going to be too late. He couldn't be too late. With each passing mile, the urgency burned deeper, fueling him forward, forcing away exhaustion, silencing doubt. Because some bonds don't break. And no matter how many years had passed, no matter how much had changed, Nathan knew one thing with certainty. He was going to bring his partner home. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and old newspapers, a mix of something sterile and something forgotten. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows against the cold concrete floor. Nathan barely noticed. His heart pounded so hard in his chest he could feel it in his throat. He had driven through the night, barely stopping, barely thinking about anything except getting here in time. Now as he stepped through the front doors, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin, but he pushed it aside. A woman at the desk glanced up. She looked tired, overworked, but her eyes softened when she saw him. "You must be Nathan Carter." He nodded, his voice failing him for a moment. I'm here for Thor. Something in her expression shifted. Pity? Maybe relief? Maybe both. She didn't ask him to wait, didn't make him fill out forms or answer questions. Instead, she gestured toward the back hallway. He's down here. Nathan followed her, his boots echoing against the tile. Every step felt heavier than the last. The barking started before they reached the kennels. High-pitched yaps, deep-throated growls, the sounds of restless dogs desperate for attention. But Nathan barely heard them. His focus was on the last kennel at the end of the row. And then he saw him. Thor was curled in the corner, his massive body slightly hunched, his fur duller than Nathan remembered. The years had carved their marks into him. His muzzle was almost entirely gray now, and his once powerful frame had thinned. But it was him. Nathan swallowed the lump in his throat and forced himself to speak. Thor. The dog didn't react at first. He remained still, his breathing steady but slow. Then his ears flicked. Thor's head lifted slightly, his tired amber eyes searching, almost disbelieving. Nathan stepped closer, pressing his hands against the metal bars. It's me, buddy. It's me. Thor's entire body tensed, his ears pinned back for a brief moment, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Then, with an effort that looked almost painful, he pushed himself up onto shaky legs. The whimper that escaped him was raw, broken, filled with years of waiting, years of loneliness. His tail gave one weak wag before he stumbled forward, pressing his head against the bars, pushing, desperate to get closer. Nathan dropped to his knees, his fingers slipping through the gaps, touching the fur he had thought he might never feel again. Good boy, he whispered, his voice shaking. You held on. I'm here. Thor let out another whine, his body trembling. But this time, it wasn't from age. It was from something deeper. He had waited, and finally his handler had come back for him. The room was still. The sounds of barking and shuffling feet from the other kennels faded into the background, swallowed by the moment unfolding in front of them. Shelter staff stood frozen, watching as the war dog who had ignored every visitor, who had remained motionless in his cage for months, now pressed himself desperately against the bars, his body trembling, his whimpers raw with emotion. Thor didn't just recognize Nathan, he needed him. Nathan felt the weight of it, the years of waiting, the silent suffering, the loyalty that had never wavered. His throat tightened as he ran his fingers through the thick fur of Thor's neck, feeling the frailty beneath. His partner had grown older, thinner, but he was still his. He hasn't reacted like this to anyone, the shelter worker murmured, her voice laced with disbelief. He barely moves most days. But now... Nathan didn't need to hear the rest. He stood, turning to face the woman. I'm taking him home. There was no hesitation, no discussion to be had. Thor belonged with him. He always had. The woman hesitated, glancing at the other staff before nodding slowly. Let's get the paperwork started. Nathan barely heard her as she unlocked the kennel. The second the latch clicked, Thor surged forward, staggering slightly on weak legs, but forcing himself toward his handler. Nathan caught him, gripping his thick fur, bracing against the sheer force of emotion in the dog's movement. Thor buried his head against Nathan's chest, his body vibrating with soft whimpers, his breathing uneven, as if the weight of everything he had endured was finally breaking free. Nathan knelt down, wrapping his arms around his partner. Never again, buddy, he whispered. You'll never be alone again. Thor let out a deep exhale, his tail giving one weak wag before resting against Nathan's knee. The adoption process was a blur. Papers were signed, formalities exchanged, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the weight of Thor's head resting against Nathan's leg, the warmth of his old companion pressed against him, refusing to move, as if afraid this was all a dream. When they finally stepped outside, Thor blinked against the sunlight, his ears twitching as he took in the open air for the first time in years. Nathan opened the truck door, patting the seat. Come on, boy. Thor hesitated for only a second before he climbed in, slow but determined. His body settled against the worn fabric, his head resting on the dashboard. Nathan climbed in beside him, letting out a shaky breath as he gripped the wheel. Let's go home. Thor didn't move. He didn't need to. He already knew. He was finally safe. The road stretched out before them, endless and quiet. The hum of the tires against the pavement was the only sound for miles. But Nathan didn't mind the silence. It felt different now. It wasn't the kind of silence that gnawed at him, the kind that came from loneliness or loss. It was the silence of something being put right. Thor lay stretched across the passenger seat, his head resting against Nathan's leg. His breathing was slow and deep, exhaustion weighing him down. But his body remained pressed against his handler, as if afraid that letting go would make everything disappear. Nathan reached down with one hand, running his fingers gently over the familiar thick fur. He could feel the bones beneath the coat, the weight Thor had lost, the years that had worn him down. But beneath it all, the dog he knew was still there, the same warrior, the same partner. You remember when we got caught in that sandstorm? Nathan said, his voice low, carrying over the steady hum of the truck's engine. Took us 2 damn days to get back to base. You hated it. Couldn't stop shaking the dust out of your fur for a week. Thor's ear twitched, and Nathan swore he saw the faintest flicker of recognition in those tired amber eyes. Or that mission in the canyon, Nathan continued. I didn't see that tripwire. You did. I'd be in pieces if it weren't for you. Thor let out a quiet exhale, his tail barely brushing against the seat. Nathan smiled, shaking his head. Yeah, you always knew before I did. Always one step ahead. The truck rolled down the empty stretch of highway, the glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the road. The further they drove, the lighter Nathan's chest felt. He glanced at Thor again. We made it, buddy. You're finally coming home. Thor didn't move much, but his head pressed a little heavier against Nathan's thigh, his body melting deeper into the warmth beside him. Even now, old instincts remained. He was still on watch, still listening, but for the first time in years, he could rest. Nathan turned his eyes back to the road. The scars of war hadn't faded. Maybe they never would. But as long as they had each other, they could carry the weight together. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan didn't feel alone. Neither did Thor. The house was quiet, nestled on the edge of a small town where the world moved a little slower. It wasn't the kind of place Nathan had ever imagined himself settling in, not after years of living out of duffel bags, moving from one deployment to the next. But now, for the first time in a long time, home didn't feel like a foreign concept. Thor moved carefully through the yard, his once powerful stride slower, but still steady. The sunlight caught in his graying fur as he sniffed the air, taking in every scent, mapping out his new territory. Nathan watched from the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands, letting the sight settle something deep inside him. It had only been a few days since he had brought Thor home, but already the old war dog seemed different. The tension in his body had started to ease. His ears weren't always pinned back. And when Nathan sat beside him at night, Thor no longer flinched at every sudden noise. Still, the instinct to protect never faded. Nathan found that out the hard way. The first night when the nightmares came, the same ones that had haunted him since he left the battlefield, he woke to the feeling of something solid pressed against his side. Thor had moved from his bed in the corner, wedging himself beside Nathan, his heavy head resting on his lap, his breath warm and steady. For the first time in years, the panic ebbed away faster than usual. You always knew when something was wrong, Nathan murmured, running a hand over Thor's thick coat. The dog didn't move, didn't make a sound. He simply stayed. That was the thing about Thor. He had spent his entire life saving people, and even now, after everything, he wasn't about to stop. Nathan had gone to the shelter to rescue Thor, but maybe, just maybe, Thor had saved him too. The days passed in an easy rhythm. Nathan fixed up the old house, setting up a space just for Thor. A thick bed near the fireplace, food bowls placed right beside his own dinner table, a backyard where he could stretch his legs. He made sure Thor never had to wait for anything again. And Thor, in return, gave Nathan something he didn't even know he needed. Purpose. A reason to wake up in the morning. A reason to keep going. They had spent years in battle together, And now they were fighting a different kind of war, the war of healing, of learning how to live outside the battlefield. But this was a mission they would face together, because true loyalty never fades. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that settled deep in the bones, heavy with unspoken words. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting long shadows against the walls, but Nathan barely noticed. His hand moved slowly over Thor's fur, the motion rhythmic, familiar, comforting, for both of them. Thor's body had grown thinner over the years, his once powerful muscles softened with age. His movements were slower now, more careful, but his eyes, those sharp amber eyes, had never lost their depth. Even as time wore him down, even as his steps became more labored, he had never stopped watching over Nathan, never stopped waiting at the door, never stopped being the protector he was born to be. Tonight, though, something was different. Thor had barely moved from his spot near the fire. His breathing was deep, steady but slow, each inhale a little softer than the last. He had eaten less that day, walked a little less, his tired body asking for rest. Nathan had known this day would come. He had told himself he would be ready. But as he sat there, one hand resting on the only soul who had never left his side, he realized something. "You're never ready." Thor let out a quiet sigh, shifting just enough to press his head against Nathan's lap. His body was warm, solid, but there was something in the way he settled that made Nathan's chest tighten. He wasn't just resting, he was letting go. Nathan swallowed hard, his fingers curling into the thick fur at Thor's neck. "You did good, buddy," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You did everything I ever asked of you." Thor's tail moved once, the faintest wag, before it stilled again. His eyes fluttered open, looking up at Nathan with that same steady trust, that same loyalty that had never wavered. Nathan exhaled shakily. He forced a small, broken smile. "I told you I'd never leave you behind." Thor's ears twitched slightly at the words. Then with a final deep breath, he closed his eyes, and he was gone. Nathan didn't move. He just sat there, his hand resting against the body that had once stood between him and death, the partner who had saved him in more ways than he could count. A warrior, a protector, a friend. The next morning, Nathan buried him beneath the old oak tree in the yard, the same spot where Thor had spent countless afternoons lying in the sun, listening to the world. He placed a small engraved plaque into the ground beside it. Thor, soldier, hero, family. The story of a forgotten war dog had nearly ended in a shelter, alone. But Nathan made sure the world knew the truth. Thor had been more than a soldier. He had been a savior. And now he would never be forgotten. Because some promises are never broken. Some bonds can never be broken. Thor's story is proof that loyalty, love, and sacrifice extend beyond the battlefield. He wasn't just a soldier, he was family. And thanks to Nathan, he got the home he always deserved. If this story moved you, if you believe that no hero should ever be forgotten, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Share this video to honor the incredible loyalty of our K9 warriors, because every hero deserves to be remembered.